This is Barney Espinoza being interviewed by Pat Kenny at Mesquite, Nevada on October 4th, 2013 at 11 a.m. The purpose of this interview is to collect information on squadron members as part of the Purple Fox HMM 364 Squadron Oral History Project.
I'm Barney Espinoza. I was born and raised in Austin, Texas. At an early age, after ninth grade, on a lark, a buddy of mine and I joined the National Guard. We lied about our ages because we were both just 15. And I thought it was an adventurous new idea, so I enjoyed being in the National Guard. Went to a deployment to Fort Hood, Texas. I thought it was a riot. It was very loose, not very rigid military training or anything like that. Based on that first summer, we decided that we were given the opportunity to go to Army boot camp, be on active duty for a period of about 8 weeks, and then return back home and continue serving with the National Guard. So based on the fun experience that I had at Fort Hood, I thought this would just be an extension of that fun, so I volunteered to go. Unfortunately, I had a big surprise because those regular Army guys, and there were a bunch of World War II veterans and Korea veterans, they didn't have as much sense of humor as I thought they would have, and it was shocking to me, but I enjoyed it overall. I finished my 8 weeks, went back home, continued to serve with the National Guard. And for another year, went on another deployment. The following year, I was given the opportunity to go to an infantry school at the same place in Arkansas, Fort Chaffee. And I went through the infantry school. Of course, by this time, I felt much more like a gung-ho soldier. And I was turning 17. At the same time, my peers, my buddies, other buddies, were turning 17 and they were joining the Marine Corps Reserve. So of course they started telling me how much greater the Marines were than the Army, and it sounded very interesting to me. So I went and tried to join the Marine Reserve. Being naive, I just thought I would walk up there and tell them I want to join your service, and it didn't matter that I was a member of the National Guard. I figured military service was military service. So when it got to the point of asking me for prior military service experience, I told them, and they said, "Well, do you have a discharge?" And I said, "No." And they said, "Well, you got to have a discharge." So I said, "Oh, okay." So I ran down to the National Guard, approached my sergeant major, and I said, "I want a discharge." In those days, it was obligatory service, and you were registered with the selective service. And he asked me, "How many years did you join for?" And I said, 8. And he said, "How many years have you been here?" And I said, 2. He said, "Well, come back and see me in 6 years." So I thought, this isn't good enough. It's not a good answer. So being persistent, I went back to the Marine I&I staff. And of course, Marines are not going to settle for just a no. I told them what the problem was, so they made a lot of phone calls. Next thing I know, I'm before a board, including the battalion commander and sergeant major and a few others. And they were asking me, "What did the Marine Corps Reserve offer you?" I said, "Nothing. I was already a PFC." And they said, "Did they offer you promotion?" I said, "No, I'm going to start off as a private." They said, "Why would you want to do that?" I said, "Well, it seems like more adventurous to me, and I don't want to be driving a truck in a quartermaster unit," which I was doing there with the National Guard. So after much argument, the battalion commander told the sergeant major, "Give him his discharge." So I got my discharge, went back to the Marine Corps I&I staff and presented my discharge, and I was ready to go. I've always said that being stupid and naive, you can accomplish a lot, because knowing what I know now, I would have never approached a sergeant major. But I was in the Marine Corps Reserve and very happy with what I was learning there. I went on a couple of summer deployments to Camp Pendleton, and I really enjoyed that. And when I graduated from high school, I had to make a choice. You know, what was I going to study? What kind of a job was I going to look for? And nothing appealed to me. I didn't want to continue going to college or anything like that. I was fed up with high school. So I decided, well, the Marine Corps really appeals to me. So I joined, I went on active duty for the first 4 years. And I went to Camp Pendleton and ran up and down the hills as a grunt all over Camp Pendleton. And once, on one occasion, we had helicopter support, and I got to ride the first helicopter in my life, which was a UH-34. And being a grunt, you had a staff sergeant as a platoon commander or platoon sergeant. You had a first lieutenant or even second lieutenant as a platoon commander, and then you had the higher ups to come to commander, captain. You had the sergeant major or the first sergeant, on and on. But you never wanted to talk to any one of these people because there was going to be trouble. If you approached the gunny or the staff sergeant, for one reason or another, you were going to get chewed out or even hit over the head, as they were fond of doing. When you're wearing a helmet, they hit you over the head with a stick. And it's very annoying. So you shied away from coming to the attention of any of these individuals. Well, when we were working with the helicopters, there was an occasion when they landed and we got to sit around and talk to the crew. And there were a couple of officers, the pilot, the co-pilot, I don't remember their ranks. And the crew chief, I remember, was the staff sergeant, and there was somebody else, perhaps. And I couldn't believe it. We were all amazed. They sat around, talked to us. Nobody was trying to hit us. Nobody told us to shut up. They were just very friendly. And I was really impressed when around the afternoon sometime, after working all day with us, they said, well, we're going to have to go back because Santa Ana is going to close the field. And they go, which meant they were going to close the airport, and they had to get back because it was already 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So we were not used to anyone going home at an early hour, such as 4 o'clock or 4:30, because once we were in the field, it was day and night operations. So that really impressed me, and I thought, I sure would like to be in helicopters. Well, I went to the company, either gunny or the administrative officer, and I said, I want to go into helicopters. What do I have to do? And the answer was, you're going to have to spend more time in the division before you try to get into aviation. So I thought, well, maybe I'll wait a little while. So I kept bugging people about it, and everybody gave me the same answer. You're going to have to spend more time in the division before you can go into aviation. And then one day they posted a note on the bulletin board saying that volunteers were needed to go into aviation training. And I thought, well, what the heck have I been asking for? So I signed up, and they warned me. They said, well, you're going to have to take some tests, and you're going to have to pass all these tests. And it was very discouraging. So I took the test, and I passed them. Next thing I know, they said, okay, you've been accepted to go into aviation training to Memphis. And they put me on a train out of Camp Pendleton, out of Oceanside, and I went to Memphis. Well, I was used to living in Quonset huts, where anybody who's been to Pendleton knows that everything's uphill, and the heads never have any hot water. And California nights are cold, especially in the wintertime. And so you're always showering with cold water. Facilities are up the hill, everything's up the hill, and you live in Quonset huts, about 40 people to a Quonset hut. So when I got to Memphis, it was snowing. And they assigned me to a barracks. It was 2-story barracks, super nice to me. It was a Navy barracks. And they had, although they had double bunks, but it was a big, very comfortable, central heated barracks. And I thought I was in heaven. I never lived in a barracks like that. So right away I thought, I'm gonna like this place. So I was there waiting for the school to start. Of course, taking a battery of tests, and they gave me some choices of what I could apply for. And one of the fields that interested me was aviation operations. And of course, they took us around at Memphis or Millington is a working Navy field. And so they would take us around to the corresponding departments so that we could see how they actually work. And so it sparked my interest, and I thought, yeah, I'd like to be in aviation operations. So fortunately, I did get selected to go into aviation operations school. And when I finished that, they tried to keep me at the school as an assistant to the instructors. And I said, no. I said, I want to go into a real unit. And they said, why? I said, well, I want to go overseas. And they said, well, it might take a long time. I said, still, I want to get into a real unit. I didn't want to be an instructor or an assistant to an instructor. And so I was sent to El Toro, California. Well, considering all my background and experiences that I had had with the grunts and the majors and the lieutenants and the captains or the sergeants, the gunny and such, the relationships that I had there, when the group took me to report to my office, they took me into the operations office and they said, this is PFC Espinoza, and he's going to be working here. And the operations officer, who was a major at the time, was standing there in the middle of the floor putting on his flight suit and his leggings, because it was VMCJ 3 and they had the FAU Crusaders. And I had never been around a pilot, and this guy just fit the role model of what I'd seen in comic books, and putting on his flight suits. The jets were parked right outside, no more than about 10, 15 yards from the building, from the hangar. And he stuck out his hand and said, welcome aboard, Barney. And it floored me. Here's a major calling me Barney. And then I looked around the room, and there must have been 3 or 4 lieutenants in there. There were a couple of captains and more captains and lieutenants and majors walking in and out like more than I had ever seen before. So I thought, this looks like a pretty good deal. And I enjoyed the work, and it was a real close camaraderie there. You know, no one was yelling. Nobody was hitting me over the head with a stick. And everybody treated me very well. And after about a year and a half, we deployed, and it was a annual thing. We deployed and went to Iwakuni, Japan, where we became VMCJ 1. And of course, I had always wanted to travel. That was a big factor in my wanting to join the military, especially the Marine Corps, is that I wanted to go out and see the world. Well, I really lucked out because I had wonderful role models. I had great relationship with all the members of the squadron. And we deployed to Iwakuni, but that particular squadron being a photo and electronic reconnaissance squadron, we had detachments. Usually each one would stay a month, it could be South Korea, it could be Northern Japan, it could be Taiwan, it could be Philippines, a number of places. So we just rotated around. I'd be gone for a month here, a month there, come back, pick up your laundry, get advance pay, and go again. So it fit my bill. I had a wonderful time. It was great. I enjoyed visiting all these places, and I thought, I really liked that. So when that was over, by that time I was a corporal, and they asked me, well, are you thinking about re-enlisting? And I said, well, I thought to myself, if I get out, I'll never get to do this again. So I thought, no, I want to re-enlist. And of course, I went for the maximum 6 years. I rotated back to the States, went to Santa Ana, and I worked in base operations. I belonged to MAPS, but I worked at you're like a permanent TAD to base operations. And I didn't like I didn't like the duty there because they had just flunked an IG inspection. And so I walked in right into a hornet's nest. And there was inspections every day, junk of the bunk, 24 hours on, 24 hours off. But the 24 hours off included going to training, running the PFT, doing all these things in preparation for a reinspection. And the commanding officers were being relieved right and left. The base commander, the operations officer, the airfield people, all of them. It was big turmoil. And I was right in the middle of it, and I didn't like it at all. I liked the work, but I didn't like the schedules and all the extra work. So fortunately, when Vietnam broke out, the MAG 36 was going to be deployed. And since I belonged to MABS, I was thankful that MABS came and said, we want our people back, which were the permanent TAD people. We had to be pulled back by MABS so we could deploy, and I was very helpful, very grateful. I thought that I might miss Vietnam when they started talking about Vietnam, and then some of the units from Camp Pendleton, and I had some buddies, and they were saying, we're going to deploy, and I thought, what's going to happen to me? I'm just going to sit here and watch everybody go. I couldn't stand that, so I was grateful when they pulled me out, and we all boarded aboard the USS Princeton in Long Beach, and 20 days later we arrived off the coast of Vietnam, and we made a helicopter landing in an isolated place, which later we named Key Ha. And it ended up being about a mile or two north of where Chu Lai was being built at the time. So I was still belonging to MAPS, and MAPS doesn't have any airplanes, and we hardly had a tower, and we didn't have much to do there as operations people except process cargo going in and out. And so right before we landed, I was told that I was going to be part of the Provisional Rifle Company, which was a rifle company formed by people in the aviation units. And I had a secondary or primary MOS of 311. 0311, so therefore I was a big candidate for that, and they made me a squad leader. And there I was in the grunts again, and we run patrols, and we mostly built bunkers and stretched barbed wire and did all those mundane things, and including having to unload a merchant cargo ship of lumber and everything else that it was carrying. And we had to spend time unloading that. And so I kept networking, a term that was never used then. And with my other friends in operations, telling them I need a job in the operations of one of these squadrons. So the Purple Foxes came through because they had a Gunnery Sergeant Phillips who was the ops chief at 364. And I had met him. And so one day I get a call, or he came to see me or something, and said, how would you like to be ops chief of 364? And I thought, that's great. So, I forgot to explain that Phillips was getting commissioned around that early days in Vietnam. And we were there in 65, maybe like the fall or somewhere in there. And so he was getting a commission, and therefore they needed a replacement for him as ops chief. So I went over there and I got orders. I checked in and became the ops chief of the Purple Foxes. And I was happier than a hog in slop because I thought I'm back to working, doing the things I like. And then, of course, immediately, if I went to fly as a gunner, if you're foolish enough to want to be a gunner, they welcome you with open arms. And I thought, I got to do that. I don't want you to sit around here and, we might get rockets or mortars, but I want to go see what's going on. So I volunteered to be a gunner, and I flew as much as I could, and I enjoyed it. There were scary times, but I could be in a panic one moment, the next moment, I've got an adrenaline rush, and I feel great, and I can't wait to go do it again. And some of these other guys around here, now we're old timers, but I flew with them. We're all corporals and some sergeants, and I can actually say that it was some of the best time that I ever had. We're actually in Vietnam. I mean, we had the scariest time. The one thing that stands out in my mind about uh, our first few months, quite a few months in country, is the primitive conditions under which we lived. We had no showers. We rigged a tip tank from a jet plane, I guess, filled it with water, and they had a water buffalo parked next to it. And so the tip tank was up on scaffolding, and then you got under it and opened the faucet, and you got a halfway decent shower. About the best you could get there. It wasn't great. But the rule was you had you fill up the two 5-gallon jerry cans with water, and then replenish that water, pour it into the tank for every time you took a shower. So there's nothing funny to see a bunch of naked guys scrambling up the scaffolding, putting water into the tank. And but we had our shower there. When I moved over there with 364, it was the first time that I lived in a hardback tin. And because prior to that, when I was with Mavs of course builds all the hardbacks. They do all the construction, but Mavs personnel didn't have anything. We were still putting our shelter halves together in the monsoon rains, which was pretty poor, and we lived in the mud. Of course, those few months also we had scarcity of food, sea rations, and at one point they scaled back our daily sea ration supply to one box, one meal per day. And they supplemented that. If you were in the base camp there, they put out a couple of sawhorses, put up some boards on it, make a big table, and they put big cans of, I'll never forget, it said on the side of the cans, peanut butter fortified. And then they had big cans of, they were like gallon cans of jam. And then they brought this stale bread, probably from the ships, or I don't know where it came from, but it was poor quality bread. And so if you were hungry, you went by there, and of course this stuff sat out there in the hot sun all day. So you made yourself a peanut butter and jam sandwich. And I used to think, I was promised, I've always been told in training that the military was the best fed in the world and all that. And I thought, well, here we are eating peanut butter and jam sandwiches. And it went from that, we finally graduated to where we had big tins of Spam, and they were put out there on the table. And you just open the can and pull out this cold Spam, which was all with all the gel and all. And of course, it's sitting out there in the sun. You just cut a big slice, made yourself a sandwich, and that went on for another week or so. Then we had, of course, on the beverage side, they had a giant pallet of beer and sodas. And every day you would get a chit, and you could get 2 cans of beer and 2 cans of soda. And of course, the beer, maybe it was donated or something, but it was the poorest quality. We had Grand Price, Jack's, Falstaff, and all those wonderful brands, but it was beer. And of course, it wasn't heated. It sat under everything sat under a big tarp in the heat of Vietnam. And they had a guard around it. And we each got our ration each day. And of course, you did a lot of trading, trade sodas for those that like sodas, and for the beer. And they didn't have pull tabs in those days, so you just stuck a knife into the top of the can and watch it spew out like a volcano. But it sure tasted good. And we had that. And then our food ration got a little better. They went into opening cans of meat patties. And in those days, there was a popular TV commercial for dog food, and it was called um, dog patties. So everybody would be yelling, they got dog patties up there. And they had gotten a stove and they started giving us dog patties. And we thought that was wonderful. With each change, we thought, oh, this is great. This is just getting better. And of course, after a couple of weeks, it gets very tired. Then you don't like it anymore. Then they came up with the idea that every day at lunch, they would give us a canteen cup full of split pea soup. And that would go for 1 week at lunch every day. And the following week, it would alternate to French onion soup. So that was real good for a week. But after 2 or 3 weeks, you couldn't stand that stuff. And to this day, my wife doesn't cook with anything with onion soup or such in her dishes because once I smell that, and I don't eat Spam either. So things gradually got better. I flew missions. We had some real excitement. We had some great pilots. We established a great record. We had pilots that just did everything in the world to accomplish a mission, and you always had the confidence that they were going to get you out of there no matter what happened. And one of our pilots everybody loved, and unfortunately he's deceased now, was Richard Gleason, better known to us that admired and loved him as Tricky Dick, because he seemed that every time you flew with Tricky Dick, there was going to be some hot zone, there was going to be a lot of action, and we just loved that, and everybody would be admiring it. Oh, you know what Tricky Dick did today? And I was with Tricky Dick today, and guess what he did? Guess what we did? It was, everybody wanted to fly with Tricky Dick because we all wanted to see the action. We didn't want to just plain old supply or admin run. And I had a lot of experiences with that. There was a good friend of mine, was a crew chief, Davy Springer, who is now deceased also. We were flying with Tricky Dick, and we went out, and it was a max launch about 6 o'clock in the evening because one of our birds had gone down. And they didn't crash, but they just couldn't lift again or something off the rice paddy. So we all launched, and we didn't actually pick up the crew, but we were there just to cover them, and there was a lot of shooting. And so when we took off towards a small village that was there, and Tricky Dick said, watch that village in front of us. So I was on the left gun, and so I was looking at the village, I couldn't see anything, and all of a sudden we started getting fired on. So I couldn't see where it was coming from, but I saw this prominent structure, and it was unfortunately, it was a Christian church because they had a cross on top of it. And it had a thatch roof, and it had, I think it might have been cinder blocks or something. And I thought, I bet they're shooting out of that church because they think we won't shoot back. So I opened up on the church. And of course, with the tracers, I started, before we made our turn to the right, I was still shooting almost straight down by that time. And I pulled my gun out and ran over to the side of the crew chief to the big door where he had his own gun. And we made a complete turn. And when the church came back inside, we continued to fire on it. And all we could see is flames and smoke coming out of there in the dusk. And so we left, and the fire subsided, so maybe they were in church. However, it became a joke between Davy Springer and I and we were laughing that we burned a church, but it played into the scene because in later years when I served with Davy out in the Mediterranean and all that, we still were laughing. Davy Springer would say, Barney and I, we burned a church and now we're going to have to answer for it. And I kept saying, well, I hope I'm not first, Davy, because I don't want to have to explain why we burned the church down. And so, unfortunately, Davy died some years ago, so I'm hoping he cleared the way for me to arrive and I don't have to re-explain why we burned the church. But that was one of the many missions. We had a lot of rescue missions. We flew night and day, medevacs. And in the 34s, it was a small bird, so we had Arvins, and nothing was funnier or sadder than carrying the Arvins they just seemed lackadaisical about the whole situation. Uh, I never had the feeling that the Arvins were real concerned about who might invade their country. They were just not really, in my opinion, not really feeling the stress or threat as we were out there trying to help them out. And a lot of times they jump aboard the plane where we were going to take them into some zone. And of course, they get aboard with their chickens and stalks of bananas and even a live pig one time. And then we've had occasions where they'll jump out of the aircraft, not under fire, but into the landing zone, and then forget a rifle inside. So we'd take the rifle and yell at them and throw it at them. Once, Dave Springer and I loaded a bunch of them, and there were civilians and Arvin mixed, and they had a small pig strapped to a pole, and it was a live pig, and the pig was thrashing around. Of course, he didn't like a helicopter ride, so the pole was banging around the walls of the helicopter. And me as a gunner, I'm sitting facing the crew chief on the left side. He's on the right side facing me. And we kept telling the Arvins, or the people, to hold on to that pole, not to let the pig thrash around and bang up the helicopter on the inside. Well, they weren't very good at that. So Dave motioned for me to pick up the end of the stick closest to me. And he picked up his end, and I knew what he was going to do, so we just threw it out the door. And of course, all the people in the helicopter were super upset, yelling and screaming. We couldn't hardly hear them. But that was a case of flying pigs. And I can just imagine, we talked about it later, that some farmer down there in a rice paddy suddenly gets a pig from heaven. And I bet he thought, Buddha has saved me. And that was one of the funny incidents. But there were a lot of funny incidents with the Army and the people that we had to carry. One time we went to pick up a bunch of civilians in some village, and they were mostly women, and it was like they were going to on a shopping spree. And I didn't understand why we were picking them up, and we dropped them off somewhere. But when we landed, there was a large crowd out there, and they ran for the helicopter, the 34. And we couldn't keep them down, and pretty soon they're all over us, and our cords were getting unplugged, and they yanked the door off, which was a removable door from the big opening in the helicopter in the 34. So they ended up tearing the door off or removing it. So we had to stop, fight the crowd, try to get our door back, and it was a mess. But that was the way it went when we worked with the civilians or the Army. We flew many missions. We came up. I don't remember exactly when we started having the Purple Fox emblem on the aircraft and the give a shit, and everybody thought it was a great idea, and so we were very proud of that logo. And I remember that once while we were operating on the Princeton again, up and down the coast, for about 3 months after we had been in country, about 6-7 months. Then we had to go to the Philippines to get replenishments and fresh troops. So while there, we were tasked with a mission of taking President Marcos and Mrs. Marcos, on a trip to the National Cemetery. Or it's an American cemetery. I don't remember the exact name of it, but it was in commemoration of the Americans and Filipinos that had died there during World War II, and there was going to be a ceremony there, and our birds were tasked with taking this party. We were in Subic Bay or Cuby Point, and then they were going to go down and support the presidential party out of Manila and take them to the cemetery. Well, Colonel Somerville wisely said, you better remove the give a shit from their logo because they might not appreciate it. So that's the one time I remember that the give a shit portion of the logo was painted over so that the president would see that. And in all, I think the squadron, we just all clicked together. We were there in an era before the strict rules of engagement. We went there with the idea and the thought and the support for us to go in there and kick ass and win that war like Marines have done for generations throughout their history. And with that in mind, we accomplished a lot. We had everybody was willing to hang their rear end out for the mission, and we did. And it was much. We felt much better. The morale was higher under those conditions than there were during the time when I went back for my second tour, and I flew in the CH-46 then as a gunner. When I went back, the rules of engagement had gotten worse. You couldn't shoot if there were this. You could only shoot if that was that. You had to call back, get permission. So I think it cost lives. I think it caused frustration. Morale went down. And consequently, when I finished that second tour of mine, I wanted to go on the first one. I wanted to go on the second tour, which was 69 and 70. And when I left my last tour after 12 months, I thought to myself, they can send me to any war, any wars, but I'm tired of this one because we just can't conduct the war to win. We were just existing. And the Army wasn't getting any better or having a better enthusiasm about winning the war themselves. So I was really discouraged after that. I'm very proud of the service in my Marine Corps career. I'm very proud of my service in Vietnam, and I have no regrets about that. I continued my Marine Corps career in various places. I went to Beaufort, South Carolina after that first tour with the Purple Foxes, and I was with Jet, VMFA 312, for a year. I went to Hawaii for about 20 months, worked base operations, and then I was sent to Vietnam again, which I was fine with. I went back 69, 70, flew as a gunner. By the time I finished that second tour, I had accrued over 700 combat missions combined. And but when I left that last tour, I said, I'm never going to get in a helicopter again. That's it. I was more afraid of the flying, conditions, pilot error, whatever, jungles in the middle of the night, mountainous areas, the weather, than I was of the shooting. Maybe it's because when there was shooting, I was doing something. When I was just riding in the back of the helicopter, praying that we didn't run into a tree or a mountain, which was very real because we lost people that way. So when I left the country, I didn't even ride the helicopter from Marble Mountain to Da Nang Freedom Hill to catch my flight to Okinawa. Instead, I chose to ride in the back of a truck, and I thought I'm going to enjoy my trip in the back of the truck because I had flown that route to Da Nang before, having to fly under the fixed wing traffic. So those pilots hot dog, going low to the ground, in and around trees and low to the river, and I thought, I don't want any of that. I don't want to get killed on the way home. So I rode the truck. And so when I got back from that second trip, I went to New River. After a year, I went on a med cruise, which was wonderful. It was during peacetime. There was no action. That was in 72. Some of the same guys that I had flown with in Vietnam, the Purple Foxes, we were all together aboard ship in the Mediterranean. I returned back from that, and then I was sent on a company tour to Okinawa with my family. We spent 3 years there. Great tour. I was base operations chief for the Fatima airfield. Left there, went to California for 1 year, participated in the Trans-Pacific transfer of jet aircraft. We owned the C-130s, which was the support for the squadrons that were moving overseas. They moved the entire squadrons that time, so we provided the support, air refueling, and coordinating the troop movement and facilities needed along the way. We, after a year of that, I was sent to Hawaii again. I was a MAC 24 operations chief for there in Hawaii in the brigade. And I got selected for E9, and I had to make a decision whether I was going to retire or accept it. If I accepted it, I was going to have to commit for 2 more years. So I thought, no, I've done everything. I enjoyed it, loved it, but I wanted to do something else, and I wasn't sure what I was going to do. I was working on my master's degree by that time. So I went ahead and retired, went home to Austin, Texas. I got a job with the state controller as his liaison to all the courts in the state. One thing led to another. The next thing I knew, I applied for a job as a municipal court judge, wondering whether I had a chance or not, but I had all the qualifications. You're appointed by the city council, the city manager, if there's a presiding judge, he's involved too. So I interviewed with them a couple of times. They liked my qualifications, and I was appointed a municipal judge in a small city called Dripping Springs in Texas, about 13 miles south of Austin. And of course, then I had to go to more schools, judges training school and such. And after about a year, we got the court established, and I hired a couple of more judges. And after about a year, a larger city on the north side of Austin, Cedar Park, Texas, they normally had 5 judges and their own police department, and it was a larger city. And they were losing 1 judge, so they asked me if I was interested. And of course, I had better qualifications by that time. So I went ahead and went to work for them. I enjoyed that. It wasn't my real goal, I didn't aspire to be a judge. It was as if somebody had said, "You want to go to the moon?" Yeah, sure, right. And so my thoughts when I retired from the Marine Corps, I wanted to go to work in an airport. But the airport there said I had wonderful qualifications and experience, but they couldn't hire me, they didn't have the money. They said, perhaps when we build a new airport, and it was in the works then, but I kiddingly told the city aviation director, I said, by the time you build the airport, I'll be retired again. And it almost worked that way, because I was either just retired or getting ready to retire when they opened the airport, which is Bergstrom International Airport in Austin. I worked as a municipal court judge, and finally I retired in 1998. I could have gone longer, but I thought, no, it just wasn't as much fun. I enjoyed it, but it wasn't the experience or the feelings that I had with the Marine Corps. Therefore, I retired for good in 1998.